Just before we begin, I have to tell you guys that finally, this Friday, after endless requests, we're relaunching our main investigations series. It's a 30-minute super episode, complete with full video production on a scale you have never seen before on this channel. It's only through your incredible support we've been able to make this special series, so thank you so much, and be ready on Friday evening, because you cannot miss this. Now let's move on to the video. When we think of Italy, we think of the stunning canals of Venice, the peculiar Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the phenomenal architecture of Rome. It's a country full of art, history and culture, and also boasts some of the finest wine, beautiful food, and elegant fashion labels. But it does, of course, hide a dark side. In today's episode of Cold Case Detective, we'll be exploring two of Italy's most shocking cold cases. Simonetta Ferrero. July 24th, 1971 started off like any other day for Simonetta Ferrero, a 26-year-old woman living with her parents and two sisters in Milan. The family was getting prepared for a holiday to Corsica, where they would spend 1 month soaking up the sun and splashing about in crystal clear waters. Simonetta was, as one would expect, excited about the trip. The family's flight was later on that evening, but first, the young woman had some errands to run. Just before 10 a.m. that morning, Simonetta left her home and headed out. At 10:37 a.m., she purchased a French-Italian dictionary. Simonetta was also known to exchange currencies at this point, and went on to visit a perfume shop where she bought cosmetics. Although the 26-year-old had a few other things to attend to after this, including a beautician's appointment, she did not show up. At some point after 11:30 a.m., Simonetta visited the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart, a prestigious university in Milan, and one which the young woman had recently graduated from after studying political science. Given that it was a Saturday and the height of summer, the university was mostly empty. A few students milled around and a custodian was present, but other than that, and the 4 labourers who were noisily jackhammering, there was no one else at the establishment that day. It is unknown why Simonetta visited the university, and many of the reports pertaining to her case conflict with one another. While some claim she wanted to make photocopies for a friend, others state she was grabbing a book for a friend, or others say she wanted to pick up a leaflet, or even simply use the bathroom. None of these reasonings for why the young woman entered the building have ever been substantiated, and the alleged photocopies she was supposed to make were actually found in her bedroom at home. Evidently, she'd already completed that task. At around 1 p.m. the same day, Simonetta's family sat down to lunch. While at first they were agitated she hadn't appeared on time, they grew concerned when the clock struck 4 and she still had not returned. The family notified the police and cancelled their holiday as an ominous feeling loomed over them. A few days later, on Monday 26th at around 9 a.m, the university's seminarian, a 21-year-old man named Mario Toso, walked down the halls of the building. He was surprised to hear a tap running from inside a girl's bathroom, and, feeling that this was wasteful, he made his way inside. He noted that the door handle felt sticky beneath his palm, but he was even more shocked when he stepped in and was struck by a foul smell and a horrifying sight. There, lying in the middle of the floor in a large pool of blood, was 26-year-old Simonetta Ferrero. The scene was a bloodbath. There were smears of the red substance on the bathroom stalls, on the walls, and in the sink. Police were quick to arrive at the university and were astounded by the brutality of the crime. Simonetta, who was later identified by relatives as her family had collapsed in shock and her father had taken ill upon hearing the news, had been stabbed a total of 33 times, mostly in the abdomen, chest, and neck. Only 7 of these wounds were fatal. It was clear from the get-go that Simonetta had put up an intense struggle with the perpetrator. She had numerous defensive wounds and even had skin beneath her fingernails. Unfortunately, given the limited forensic techniques in 1971, this led nowhere. A bloody handprint left behind by the culprit indicated that they were between 5'9" and 6 feet tall. It was estimated that Simonetta had been slain between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. on the day she was last seen alive. Suspects in Simonetta's case were limited, and over the years, most theories were discarded almost as soon as they were considered. Authorities interviewed and investigated the custodian and labourers who'd been in and around the building on July 24th and seized their clothing, but eventually all 5 of them were dismissed as suspects. Investigators believed that the jackhammers, which had been used all morning and afternoon, likely covered up any screaming from Simonetta. None of the men had seen anything or anyone suspicious on the university's grounds. Due to the complex structure and layout of the university, law enforcement suspected that the perpetrator must have been someone who was familiar with the grounds and the building. As a result, they narrowed their focus down to students, teachers, and regulars. Mario, the man who'd found the body, was also perceived as a suspect at first because after alerting the authorities, he had left and gone back to his hometown. However, he arrived back in the area 2 days later with no injuries that would be consistent with those that Simonetta had inflicted upon her executioner. Police also couldn't find any blood on any of his clothing. As a result, Mario was cleared as a suspect, and it's believed that he fled in fear and shock. Another lead in the case came in the form of strange men who'd been seen harassing female students at the university. One man in particular was known to carry a knife on a train travelling from Milan to Saronno, on which he threatened women passengers. In his house, police uncovered a diary that disturbingly read, quote, "I hate women," and "I want to kill them all." However, this man was later dismissed as a suspect when he was entered into a mental health facility. At this point, leads in the case began to dry up. Simonetta was described as a serious and hard-working woman who was very career-driven and rarely, if ever, entered into relationships. Family and friends claimed that while she'd had a few flirtations, she'd never seriously dated anyone. Thus, there were no rejected lovers in her life, nor any jealous ex-boyfriends. She came from a wealthy background and worked at the same company her father did, interviewing prospective employees. In her free time, she volunteered with the Red Cross, and according to her childhood priest, she was even considering becoming a nun. Authorities wondered if the attack was sexually motivated, but tests confirmed that Simonetta had not been sexually assaulted. They then wondered if she'd been slain for financial gain, but found that her gold jewellery was all intact, as was the money in her handbag. It was then questioned whether or not she had ruffled any feathers in the workplace, but authorities found nothing here either. By the end of August 1971, 356 people had been interviewed by authorities, but they were left with nothing. Over the course of the following years, a few men attempted to confess to the crime, but all were proved to be hoaxes. Simonetta's case quickly came to a dead end. It was in the spotlight once more in 1994, when a prefect of Milan who'd worked the case received an anonymous letter. The letter detailed the case of a Venetian priest who'd worked at the university in 1971, but was removed 3 years later for sexually harassing a student. Yet again though, this lead went nowhere, and Simonetta's case faded from the public's memory as it continued to grow cold. There are a few other theories connected with Simonetta's slaying. For a time, it was speculated that her death was linked with that of 11 other women who were killed between 1970 and 1975 by an unknown serial killer. The perpetrator targeted ordinary women like Simonetta as well as sex workers, but this theory has since been abandoned. The case was also thought to possibly be related to another murder that occurred in January of 1987, but this idea has also been thrown out. In the decades since, there have been far more questions in Simonetta's case than there are answers, or even theories. We may never know what happened to her that summer's day, and it's possible that her killer, whoever he or she may be, still walks free, having gotten away with brutal murder. Wilma Montesi. The strange, unexplained death of Wilma Montesi is messy, unclear, and complex. It also has attached to it an extensive scandal involving drugs, sex parties, high-powered politicians, and Rome's elite. To this day, it is still unresolved, and although it was labelled by police at the time as an accident, speculation about what really happened to Wilma on the day she dies continues to be discussed, and nobody believes it was simply an unfortunate mishap. At around 5:19 p.m. on April 9th, 1953, 21-year-old Wilma Montesi was seen leaving the 3-roomed apartment she shared with her family in a suburb of Rome. Described as a quiet and reserved woman, Wilma was engaged to be married to a police officer who was from Potenza and lived a fairly unextraordinary life, although she had big dreams of entering the world of cinema and show business. She had even made an uncredited appearance in the 1952 film Ergastolo, also known as Prison. Upon leaving her home, witnesses placed Wilma as being on a train going from Rome to Ostia, which was about 20 kilometers away. While the young woman's family noted that she had no knowledge of public transport, police seemed satisfied that she did indeed take the train of her own volition. From here, Wilma headed to a beach called Torvaianica, where the owner of a kiosk selling postcards claimed that she had seen and spoken with a young woman who resembled Wilma, and that she bought an illustrated postcard which she intended to send to her boyfriend in Potenza. After this, the 21-year-old's movements are unknown. Several days later, on April 11th, a labourer who was having breakfast at the beach found the body of a young woman lying on the shore, with her head immersed in the water. She was partially dressed, with her handbag missing. She also had no shoes, stockings, or garter belts. While most reports state that she had no skirt, it appears from crime scene photos that she did, and that it was perhaps the slip underneath that she was missing. News of this unidentified woman quickly broke, and although authorities banned press from entering the mortuary, one journalist posing as a lawyer managed to get through. In the article he wrote following his visit, he described the young woman in great detail, which allowed Wilma's father to identify Jane Doe as his missing child. While law enforcement managed to construct more of Wilma's final day, or her presumed final day, it didn't offer much more in the way of clues. Reportedly, her mother and sister had spent the afternoon at the cinema watching The Golden Coach, and although they'd asked Wilma to accompany them, she had declined. She told them that she'd rather go for a walk instead. When Wilma's mother and sister returned later on, she wasn't there. They found it odd that she'd left behind her ID and the jewellery she'd been gifted by her boyfriend, which she always wore when she went out. The police found that the building's caretaker had seen the young woman leave, but he hadn't seen her return. Wilma's body was taken to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Rome for examination, and the death was quickly ruled as accidental. Medical experts concluded that she had gone to the beach to soak her feet in the seawater as they were sore from her new pair of shoes, but that she ultimately fainted and drowned. Wilma apparently couldn't swim, and they argued that her sudden illness was due to her period, which had been present at the time of her death. There were reportedly no traces of drugs or alcohol in her system, and the distance between where she was last seen and where she was found was explained away by investigators as being due to the sea currents. There are conflicting reports about whether or not the 21-year-old was sexually assaulted. The first autopsy showed that she had not, as they determined that Wilma was still a virgin, but later examinations noted the presence of sand inside of her, which led to the speculation that there had been an attempted sexual assault, but that it had failed. While the police were satisfied with the autopsy outcome and closed Wilma's case just 5 days after her body was found, the general public and the press were not so easily swayed. After the case was closed, theories began to circulate. She could have taken her own life, but her family argued that she showed no signs of depression and noted how excited she was about her upcoming wedding. Journalists wondered if her parents were so quick to dismiss the idea of suicide because they were a Christian family, and they wanted her to have a proper burial. Others have questioned why Wilma would take such a long journey just to either take her own life or dip her feet in the water. And since she was expected home for dinner, why make the journey at 5:30 in the evening? It's also been asked numerous times, why did Wilma remove her suspender belt when she was simply dipping her feet in the water? Another theory about Wilma's demise was that her uncle was involved. Apparently the young man had encouraged her to break off her engagement. He was also seen as somebody who lived outside of societal norms by consorting with society's undesirables and those of a dubious nature, which meant that the general public found him to be an unsavory character, and they took this theory very seriously. While he at first refused to give an alibi, he later relented, telling investigators that he'd been with his girlfriend's sister. He later had 2 children with this woman. What no one could have expected was for the case to devolve in the way it did over the next few years. Prominent figures in cultural, political, and judicial systems were called out for reportedly taking part in drug-fueled sex parties, and many were said to have been involved in consorting with sex workers and known criminals. It's at this point in Wilma's case that things start to become unclear. As journalists began to investigate, several proposed the idea that the theory of death being accidental was a cover-up to protect high-powered politicians and the elite and wealthy in Roman society. According to reports, the aforementioned sex parties took place in an estate near where Wilma's body was found, and was managed by a man named Marquess Ugo Montagna. This man was friends with the son of Italy's foreign minister, who later resigned due to the scandal exploding around his son. Newspapers received letters from all across the country, with one claiming to have observed a man in a car with a woman who resembled Wilma driving through the estate. The driver was later identified as the nephew of the last king of Italy, and was, at one point, charged in Venice for being involved in crime. Marquess and Piero, the son of Italy's foreign minister, were also sent to Venice in 1957 to stand trial, where they'd been charged with being accessories in Wilma's death. A police chief was also tried for being involved with the cover-up. He was the same man who'd opted to close the case 5 days after the body was found. During the trial, Piero's actress girlfriend confirmed that the couple had spent the days leading up to the incident together in Ravello. He returned home on the 9th, but had an alibi thanks to the doctors and nurses who attended to him while he was home sick. Ultimately, all 3 men were acquitted when judicial authorities concluded that there could not be a cover-up and they could not be accessories to the crime, as far as they were concerned, no crime had been committed. Wilma's death was an accident. Much of these alleged revelations about the estate came to light because of an ex-girlfriend of Marquess, a woman who often went by Anna Maria. She claimed that he was running a drug ring and accused him of being involved with the disappearances of several women. She also said that Marquess used Piero as an assassin, and that she'd heard the two discussing getting rid of Wilma, who, for a short time, had apparently been a lover of Marquess. These accusations were enough for an investigation to be opened, but, as we mentioned earlier, it saw no results. Around about this time, a journalist named Silvano Muto proposed the theory that Wilma had been a drug runner, and that she had overdosed at the estate during one of its infamous sex parties. His evidence came in the form of another wannabe actress, Adriana Basacchia, who claimed to have participated in an orgy with Wilma. She said she'd consumed too much alcohol and drugs and ultimately overdosed, so her body was taken and dumped on the beach. However, authorities chose to ignore Silvano and put him on trial for spreading false and tendentious news to disturb public order. And during the trial of those suspected to have been involved with Wilma's death, Anna Maria herself was essentially torn to shreds, her evidence ridiculed. Silvano spent 2 years in prison, while Adriana was given a 10-month suspended sentence. Anna Maria later stood trial herself, and in 1966 she was given 2 years in prison. The media portrayed Wilma as a good girl who just happened to meet a tragic end. She was buried in her wedding dress. Although her case remains cold, in 2015 a criminologist and journalist investigated case documents which were previously thought to have been lost. He concluded that her death was connected to her private life, and that an important thread of investigation had been overlooked and not thoroughly explored. Unfortunately, with the amount of time that's passed and the lack of forensic evidence, it seems very unlikely that we'll ever know what truly unfolded in the final hours of Wilma's life. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.